Ever stepped off a train, in some new city and thought, whoa, this whole railway system is like a different world compared to back home.
It really can be a world of difference, yeah.
It's like, I don't know, comparing a perfectly made espresso to that instant coffee I sometimes settle for
Ah, interesting comparison.
when you really need a caffeine fix.
Yeah, I get it. And just like a good espresso, that perfect railway system needs everything to work together in a really delicate balance. It's what we call a systems approach, where everything's connected.
Okay, so systems approach, what's that mean in plain English for how railways actually work?
Well, picture a giant web, right? Track maintenance, the signals, customer service, even government regulations, they're all threads in this massive system, all woven together. If one strand gets messed up, the whole thing can unravel.
Wow, so it's a lot more than just laying down some tracks.
Oh, absolutely. It's more like conducting this crazy complex orchestra with all these moving parts.
Speaking of complex, today's deep dive takes us right into the conductor's booth, so to speak. We're going deep into planning and management of railway to really understand what modern railways are up against.
And believe me, they're facing a whole trainload of challenges, so to speak.
Okay, I see what you did there.
But in all seriousness, I think the biggest hurdle is adaptability. I mean, think about it. You've got the 2008 economic crisis, technology that changes faster than a speeding bullet train, and then the rise of those low-cost airlines. Railways have to keep up or they'll get left behind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talk about a high-pressure environment. And speaking of pressure, this source highlights how railways are feeling the heat, not just from outside competition, but also from within.
Exactly. On one hand, you've got planes, cars, even those pipelines, all competing for a slice of the transportation pie.
Right, it's a crowded market.
But then you've got this internal struggle, too. You have multiple train operators all fighting for space on the same tracks. It's a constant battle.
Wow, so it's like rush hour on the rails all the time. Okay, so how do railways even stay afloat with all this competition? Can't exactly have a two-for-one sale on train tickets, can they?
Well, that's where you need some serious strategic thinking. It's the difference between putting out small fires and having a long-term vision. Let's say a railway company is thinking about building a brand new high-speed line between some major cities. That's a strategic decision, a game changer.
Right, because that could completely change how the whole network operates.
Exactly, but then you have your day-to-day stuff like figuring out the staff schedules on the routes they already have. That's tactical, important for things to run smoothly.
So it's like they're playing chess while conducting an orchestra at the same time.
That's a great way to put it. You need the grand strategy and also that precise moment-to-moment execution.
For sure. But how do you even manage all of that in these massive organizations? Like, railways are huge.
That's where business units come in. Imagine taking this gigantic company and splitting it into smaller, more focused teams. You'll have your infrastructure pros, the rolling stock experts, the passenger service gurus, and the freight logistics masters. Everyone has their specialty.
Okay, so it's like having specialized departments, each with its own area of expertise.
Exactly. And railways, just like any successful business, they know that quality control is everything.
And it's not just about being on time, although I'm sure that's a big part of it.
Right, of course. But it's bigger than that. We're talking about the entire experience for the passenger.
This is where the source mentions the ISO 9001 standard, which, I'll be honest, whenever I hear ISO, my eyes kind of glaze over.
I hear you. It sounds technical, right?
Yeah. Can you explain it in a way that makes sense for us everyday folks who just want to get from A to B? Why should we care about this ISO thing?
Sure. Think of ISO 9001 as like the gold standard for quality. It means that the railway company is constantly checking their work, always trying to improve their service.
Okay, so it's more than just going through the motions. They're actually trying to make things better.
Yeah. Think about those little comment cards they sometimes have on trains or the online surveys they send out. With ISO 9001, that feedback actually goes somewhere. They use it to make real changes based on what passengers want.
So it's all about listening to the customers and making the entire system better.
That's the goal. And when you're up against some stiff competition, that high-quality experience, it's everything. That's how they keep people coming back for more.
Because, let's be real, no one wants to go back to those bumpy, crowded bus rides when you've got a smooth, comfy train as an alternative.
You got it. And speaking of competition, I think it's time we dug a little deeper into how railways are going head-to-head with those other forms of transport and even with each other to win over passengers.
So we've talked about all that competition between different railway companies, all vying for space on the same tracks.
Right, like a real race for the rails.
But what about going up against airlines? Especially with those budget airlines popping up everywhere. That's a whole other level, right?
It's a tough battle for sure, and that's where this idea of generalized cost comes in.
Yeah.
Railways really need to think about that.
Generalized cost. Okay, I got to be honest, that sounds a little jargony.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for someone like me who just wants to get from point A to point B?
So it's not just about the price of the ticket, right?
Right.
Imagine you're trying to get to a meeting, and you're debating between a cheap flight and the train. Now, that flight might seem cheaper up front, but then you have to factor in all that extra time going through security, potential delays, maybe getting stuck in a middle seat.
Ugh, don't even get me started on those middle seats.
Exactly. And you end up getting to your meeting all stressed out and exhausted. Suddenly, that cheap flight doesn't feel like such a bargain anymore.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And railways are catching on to this. They're putting money into those high-speed lines so they can compete with air travel times, especially for those mid-range trips.
Makes sense.
Plus, they're making the whole onboard experience nicer, comfy seats, decent Wi-Fi, maybe even some good food options. So you actually enjoy the journey, not just endure it.
So it's like they're trying to make the train ride part of a good travel experience, not just a means to an end.
Exactly. And don't forget the environmental angle. More and more people want to make eco-friendly choices, so taking a train instead of a plane, especially for shorter distances, it just makes sense.
Yeah, it's like choosing that locally roasted, fair trade coffee instead of the mass-produced stuff. You feel better about it.
I like that analogy. And you know what else is built to last? Those massive railway projects, the infrastructure itself.
Oh yeah, those things are huge.
Yeah.
We're talking serious engineering feats.
Absolutely. And planning those out, figuring out how to pay for them, it's a massive undertaking.
Our source mentioned something called feasibility studies. What are those all about?
Okay, so you're about to bake a cake, right?
Okay, I'm following.
You wouldn't just start throwing ingredients together without checking if you have enough flour or sugar, right?
No, that would be a disaster.
Exactly. A feasibility study, it's like the recipe for a successful railway project. They look at everything from the actual ground they want to build on to how many people they think will actually use it to the potential impact on the environment.
Wow, so they're really trying to cover all their bases.
They have to. Remember, we're talking about huge amounts of money. They need to make sure that new railway line actually makes sense, that it's not going to just be a financial black hole.
So it's about looking beyond the initial price tag and understanding what you're really getting for that investment.
Right. They want to see those long-term benefits, things like shorter travel times, less traffic on the roads, maybe even economic growth in the areas the railway connects to. They have to weigh those benefits against the cost.
It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And to tackle these massive projects, one thing railways are using more and more is something called public-private partnerships.
I've heard that term before, but I'll be honest, it sounds a bit like something you'd hear in a business school lecture. Got any real-world examples?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most famous examples is the Channel Tunnel, the one that connects England and France. That was a massive project, and they used this model called Build, Operate, Transfer, or BOT, to finance it.
BOT. Okay. So how does that work exactly?
Let's say you're a big company with lots of money to invest,
Okay.
and you see the need for this new railway, but you know it would take forever for the government to fund it alone.
So you step in and offer to build it yourself.
Exactly. And the BOT model, the company, they not only build it, but they also run it for a set number of years, maybe 20 or 30. During that time, they get their money back through fares and stuff.
So the long-term investment for them.
Yes. And after that agreed upon time, the ownership of the railway, it goes back to the government. So the company gets a return, and the public gets this amazing piece of infrastructure.
It's interesting how these huge projects can bring together the government and private companies like that.
It shows you how important railways really are, for our economies and how we live our lives.
That's true. Well, this whole discussion has definitely got me thinking about the future of railways. It feels like we're at this turning point, right? Where do we go from here? Are we headed for a railway renaissance, or are we about to hit the brakes? Yeah, it really does feel like we're at a pivotal moment for railways. It's like we've got all this history, these huge systems that have been around forever.
It's true. They've been with us for centuries.
But then there's all this new technology, all these big ideas about how things could be different in the future.
It's an exciting time to be thinking about railways, that's for sure. There are so many possibilities.
So what do you think? Are we going to see a world where high-speed trains are the norm and freight lines are all electric and crisscrossing the globe? Or will trains become more of a niche thing, with self-driving cars and drones taking over?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a rich man. But honestly, it's hard to say for sure. One thing's for certain, though. This whole sustainability issue, it's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, that makes sense. Climate change, air pollution, it's all pushing people to look for greener options. And railways, they fit into that picture pretty well.
Absolutely. And remember that generalized cost idea we talked about? Well, as people become more aware of their environmental impact, that cost calculation starts to include things like your carbon footprint. And suddenly, taking the train, especially for freight, it becomes a much more appealing choice.
Right, because you're not just thinking about the price tag anymore, you're thinking about the impact on the planet.
Exactly. But it's not enough to just be the green option. Railways have to keep up with technology too. We're already seeing things like self-driving trains, AI being used to predict maintenance issues, even that Hyperloop idea, which could completely change how we think about high-speed travel.
It's mind-blowing to think how much things could change, both for people riding the rails and for moving stuff around.
It is, and we can't forget about the human side of things either. Railway planning and management, it's also about understanding what passengers need and expect, making sure they can easily connect to other forms of transportation, giving them clear information, and keeping everyone safe and secure.
So it's about the whole travel experience, making it enjoyable, not just about getting from point A to point B.
Exactly, it's about the entire journey.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has given us a lot to think about when it comes to railways.
It really has. This industry, it's a microcosm of so many of the big issues we're facing today. Sustainability, technological innovation, how to meet the needs of a changing world.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up today, we want to leave you with this. Next time you see a train, take a moment to think about everything that goes into keeping it moving. All the decisions, the planning, the challenges, the possibilities. The future of railways is still being written. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time.